How's it going, folks? Matt here again, and I'm just doing another fire starting video, but this time we're going to be doing a chemical fire starter. So all of our inner mad scientists get to play a little bit. But of course, before I start, considering we are dealing with chemicals that can be extremely dangerous and harmful if misused, you always want to have protection on, including, safety glasses and stuff like that, especially considering the stuff we're dealing with today is more of a powder form than what you would normally get. Normally the stuff comes in more of a crystalline form, so you're not as much of a risk of inhalation problems with the crystallized form versus the powder form. So you do have to be more careful with the powdered form. If you get like a gust of wind or something like that, or if you accidentally inhale some of it, it reacts with water. This stuff is a extreme oxidizer, and it can cause caustic burns and things like that. So you do have to respect the things you're dealing with, even if you're kind of just playing around a little bit. But so if you can read this, today we're dealing with something called potassium permanganate. Now I got this at Ace. This is about 30 some bucks for this big jug. I will be actually getting some lab grade crystal form for my actual personal survival kit, but this is just the stuff that I had on hand. It's fairly easy to get a hold of. Like I said, it's actually for treating water filters, green sand filters. It's usually treat iron and iron bacteria that are in your water systems. It's also used sometimes for aquariums and things like that, but I'm not really familiar with that personally. But alrighty, so a reason potassium permanganate is really popular in survival kits and with survivalists is it's a multi-use item. So not only can you start a fire with it, you can also clean wounds and treat certain things like fungal infections of the feet. Things like impetigo, superficial wounds, dermatitis, and weeping ulcers and things like that. So it's good for your med kit. It's good for a fire starter because, well, here, I'll show you real quick. This stuff stains really easily. It's this bright purple powder. You can see that here. It's hard to see through the jar. I really appreciate it. I'm going to take just the tiniest amount, if I can here. Just the smallest amount. Sorry if I can get that to focus. That's probably even too much. I'm going to add it to that cleared bit of water here and show you. Look at that instant change. So, a lot of times for your first aid use, they talk about the color of the mixture you're doing. It's usually, most things I've read about so far, they're talking about it being a very light pink solution. So a little bit of this stuff goes a long way. There are still crystals in the bottom there that are dissolving. So if you're not careful, if you make this stuff up too strong to treat wounds and things like that, you can actually cause chemical burns. So again, it's probably better to go a very light, mild solution. At least according to the UK, they're talking about like a 0.01%, so like 1 to 10,000 ratio of this stuff. Although there is some evidence that even something up to as strong as a 5% can work for wound treatment. But yeah, so that would be one of my main uses for medical. A lot of people in the survival community also talk about the fact that you can use potassium permanganate to purify water and make it safe to drink. Now, I have not yet been able to find any scientific or medical research that condones that. Only other survivalists and preppers and things like that say you can, add a very small amount, a very light pink. That is obviously way too strong of a mix to drink. They talk about that, but I personally, that makes me leery that I can't find any actual scientific or medical data to say that that's safe. They almost all warn against it because it is such a powerful oxidizer. It can cause chemical burns. The last thing I want to do is ingest it, but in a dire emergency, I guess it would be better than dying of dehydration, but again, and also this is not going to treat heavy metals or other chemicals like pesticides and things like that. So for me, water filtration, not what I would ever want to use this for, I don't think. And I'm not a fan of the chemical water filters anyways, or water purification, sorry. Such as iodine, chlorine, that kind of stuff, because, granted, while they will work, but if it's strong enough to kill all the bad stuff creeping and crawling around in the water that you're trying to make safe to drink, it's going to kill all the good bacteria you have in your gut that keeps you healthy. So that is a price you'd have to pay if you do choose to go with the chemical water sanitize or sterilization. So that is not at all, I'm not a fan of any of that. I would much rather, you know, water filters, boiling the water, if at all possible, that kind of stuff. I really am not a fan of the chemical purification, but that's just me. So, but now that the safety stuff's out of the way, oh, and I forgot to mention, I don't know if I might have skipped over that. I'm a little bit disjointed, not on a script here. I'm just rambling, but obviously you can see this light purple with just a small amount of that stuff. If I were to add a fair bit more and make this a really dark purple, this is really good for signaling in the wintertime. You know, if you can get some of this melted, you know, get some snow melted down, mix it with the stuff, and then make a bright, bright purple stain out on a snowbank somewhere. That obviously is going to be unnatural. It's going to be drawing attention from people that may be searching for you. So, you know, you can use it for a fire starter. You can technically use it probably for water purification. You can use it for medical treatment, and you can use it for signaling. So it is a very, very handy chemical to have. And plus, it's kind of just fun to get to make fire with chemicals. So, now then, probably, well, let me move this out of the way. I don't want to stain myself or my concrete here. Now, the way that I would probably prefer to carry this in my kit is potassium permanganate and sugar. One of the easier ways to do it would be potassium permanganate and glycerin, which you can get at beauty stores. You can get it at baking stores and stuff like that. I got this whole bottle here for about $6 at a natural grocer. It's vegetable glycerin. Doesn't have to be any specific brand. You just add these two together and it causes a chemical reaction, causes fire. I'll demonstrate that. However, glycerin is probably not going to be an item that a lot of people are going to have in their survival kit. It's kind of a one-trick pony, really, as far as I know. It's really for, you know, moisturizing skin, but I'm going to have other things in my kit for that. So I'm not going to be carrying around potassium permanganate and glycerin, but it is an option. It's just to add the two together, sit back, and let it go. I have heard some people say that it doesn't necessarily work very well for in cold conditions, that temperature may affect it. That is something that I am going to be testing myself when it's below freezing to make sure that it doesn't really rely on ambient temperature. It may slow the process down, but I don't know if it'll completely stop the chemical reaction. So first, we're going to cover what some people call sweet fire, which is just your, like I said, your potassium permanganate and sugar. So let me demonstrate. Take about a heaping spoonful here. I have noticed that if you don't have the ratio quite right, if there's more sugar or fuel versus oxidizer, it tends to, it ignites and it creates a lot of heat, but it doesn't actually give you a flame. So I think that's if there's too much sugar, not enough oxidizer, which is easily remedied by, you know, get an even mix, so 1-to-1 ratio, do your grinding, and once you get ignition, simply add more oxidizer, more of the potassium permanganate, which then causes an actual fire ignition. But either way, even if you don't actually get open flame out of this stuff, it's plenty hot to ignite your tinder that you've got laying around. And so again, you still have to follow all the other protocols of fire starting with this stuff. You need to have your tinder all prepped and ready, your fire lay and everything. This is just the ignition point. But so we did about two spoonfuls of this potassium permanganate and just about a spoonful or so. I'll do a little bit more. Like I said, this seems to make it a little bit easier to ignite, more fuel than not. And again, so the sugar is the fuel. That's calories in that sugar, in the sucrose, and the potassium permanganate is the oxidizer. So when you add the actual ignition, you've got your fuel and your oxygen right there. So it's the same principles with all fire starting essentially. You have the three legs of the stool, you know, the tripod. You have your fuel, you have your oxygen, and you have the energy or the heat that you add in to get it going. So we're going to just mix this powder and sugar. Just mix it around a little bit. Didn't have to be great. And again, you know, in an actual situation, it's tempting to kind of want to do this with your fingers, but this stuff is really concentrated, and I would not at all recommend skin-to-skin contact. And it will actually also stain, not just purple, it'll actually stain your skin brown, apparently, but it's temporary. It's not anything permanent, so I'm not too worried about that. I just don't want to get any chemical burns on myself. So that's well enough mixed. Take, you know, a rock, a stick, you know, you're doing this on something hard, so you're not going to do this on the ground, because you actually have to grind this stuff up. And I think what's happening is, as you're grinding the sugar crystals down, it's making it easier for the potassium permanganate and the sugar to combine. I did a little bit of an experiment where I actually added a little bit of water, and while that does create an exothermic reaction, it's a wet heat, not a dry heat, so it's not going to ignite your fire for you. So that I wouldn't recommend with the water on this stuff. But you kind of grind it up, you're adding that energy in, and it's wanting to go. It's just actually getting it to catch. There we go. That was actually easier than I thought it would be. So once it starts, kind of start pushing it all together. And again, like I said, it doesn't quite have enough oxidizer, I don't think, to create an open flame. So if you're after an open flame, just add a bit more oxygen, more heat, poof, there you go. And as you can see, that's a pretty violent reaction right there. That is creating that's releasing a lot of energy. And it's not just, like I said, the open flame. Even if there's not an open flame, the inside of that is quite hot. So you could be adding your flammable materials, your flammable tinders to that. That's like a red hot little core inside of there. Sorry if I can get it to focus. Yeah, so that to me, at least my personal kit, that would be my more realistic usage for potassium permanganate. Combined with sugar, because sugar is also a multi-use item in survival. Say, you know, hey, it is calories. It's not very great calories, but it is calories in a survival situation. You know, use it to sweeten up, like maybe say a, you know, pine needle tea or something like that. And also too, if you happen to be out and about and you need to administer first aid to someone else, or if you yourself happen to be diabetic, you know, if someone doesn't, you know, just give them a bit of sugar to get their blood sugar levels back up. So, you know, a couple little packets of sugar from a restaurant or something like that, put them in your med kit. A really, really handy thing to have. But let's just, for fun, do the potassium permanganate and glycerin. Now, this is going to take a few minutes, or, you know, maybe not a full minute or so, but it's going to take a second for this to go. Use, again, just however much of the potassium permanganate you want. Make a little indentation here in the top so the glycerin doesn't run off on you. So, essentially making a volcano crater in the middle of this. Get your glycerin. We'll get ourselves back into focus here. You just add the glycerin. So again, the glycerin is the fuel, and the potassium permanganate is the oxygen, or the oxidizer. And then that, we'll just leave that, and that will eventually ignite. So, but in the meantime, I did actually forget, there are two other ways to ignite potassium permanganate. If you don't happen to have like a lighter or something like that, you can either use antifreeze out of a vehicle, if you have one handy, and you can also use brake fluid. But again, obviously, in a survival situation or a hiker, who's carrying around antifreeze and or brake fluid? So for me, those aren't really ever going to suit my purpose, but those are, just for reference, those are also ways to ignite it. Yeah, normally this takes about 30 to 45 seconds, maybe about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, but that will eventually ignite. But let's see here. Checking my notes, I did write a little bit down here. So this stuff has been around. They think it probably actually started getting created back in around the 1600s, but it's actually been in medical use since the 1800s. And even currently today, it is highly, highly recommended as a very valuable medical resource, especially in developing countries, because the stuff is extremely cheap to make. And it's easy to make, so they really recommend it for that. So again, my personal uses, I would only probably use this for fire starting and or antiseptic uses. I would really, really have to be in a bad situation and unprepared to ever use this to actually purify water to drink, because I wouldn't want to risk you know, irritating and oxidizing the mucous membranes in your intestines and things like that. Nope, there we go. I was about to give her a little stir, but actually, since I have my hands free, I'll just bring you guys closer. So again, violent reaction. And there we go. And I've read they actually use this. They'll actually have like plastic ping pong ball like devices that they'll have some of the potassium permanganate in, and you can actually then inject it with, you know, the ignition, the fuel of your choice, whether it's glycerin or whatever they use. But they'll actually use that and then fire those little ping pong balls. I just added a bit more glycerin. They'll use those to do like back burns and things like that from like a helicopter or even from the ground, but that way someone doesn't actually have to physically walk over and ignite the fire themselves. You can actually do it somewhat remotely. And I have also been told as well, or heard, that it was somewhat common for arsonists to do something like that because you could create a little timed chemical reaction, but it's not really much use anymore because it's very easy with modern forensics to tell that that's been used as a ignition source. But again, you know, I mean, arson would be a terrible thing. But just giving you guys a bit of the history that I've read about this stuff. But yeah, so that was that. The video came out quite a bit longer than I expected, but I hope you guys enjoyed it.